Welcome to another episode of tianliangtimes. I'm Tianliang. Today is August 16, 2024. I'm only going to talk about one topic today because something happened today that was personally significant. Today, the New York Times published a long article attacking Shen and Fallen Gong. This article has been in the making for more than a year. I found out on Monday morning, around 4 days ago, that the New York Times had sent an email to Shen containing some quotes and facts to be confirmed, since that's a required practice in journalism. At the time, we had Ms. Ying Chen and Mr. Levi Browdy here who pointed out to them the many falsehoods in this New York Times report, as well as blatant prejudices. As you can probably figure, at this stage, before final publication, the New York Times is unlikely to seriously consider any of these comments. Their mind was already set on finishing the job. After the Shen representatives gave them feedback, they only changed very little wording. They quoted a few things from our response and published the article today. In fact, it wasn't just one article, they published 3 articles together. If I had to grade it as an argumentative essay with requirements for strong rhetoric and evidence, then I have to say this New York Times hit piece on Shen gets a 0 from me. Because its arguments are full of preconceived claims, prejudices, and lies. Its logic is extremely weak and lacks overall consistency. So all of the basic requirements of an argumentative essay are missing. Later, I'll give you examples to illustrate. Apart from attacking Shen this year, the New York Times also published an exclusive report on Fallen Gong, which I'll discuss later. First of all, I want to point out that the New York Times attacks on Shen and Falun Gong, judging from the techniques and angles, are identical to the Chinese Communist Party's methods. As you know, the CCP began to persecute Falun Gong in 1999. Back then, they fabricated many lies about Falun Gong. I think these lies can be categorized into 4 types. Type 1 is about how Master Li is accumulating a lot of wealth. This time around, the New York Times is also saying Shen has made a lot of money. Type 2 is that, as the CCP claims, Master Li is preaching about how the world is going to end, when in fact Master Li never publicized anything of the sort. At the time, the CCP actually edited the "not" out of a recording of our master saying doomsday does not exist. Right now, the New York Times is repeating a similar lie. Type 3 is the CCP claiming that Falun Gong prohibits followers from taking medicine when ill, and 1,400 people died as a result. Now, the New York Times is saying when Shen dancers get injured, they're denied treatment. This is also untrue. Later, I'll provide evidence. Type 4 is personal attacks on Master Li. When the CCP first started persecuting Falun Gong, they also interviewed some people who had followed Master Li in the earlier years, but later turned against Master Li, basically disciples who had betrayed their master, and the CCP found them and interviewed them. This time, the New York Times also interviewed ex-Shen performers, if they can be so called. Take note, they're not interviewing current Shen performers. They don't want to hear them talk about the positives of Shen. If someone's an ex-performer, it's because they didn't meet the required artistic standard, or maybe they violated company rules, or they held some personal grudges that they left. So when these people leave or are dismissed just with any other company, probably not everyone has a happy story to tell. Some of them claim they've been treated unfairly. I believe that if the New York Times were to interview people who used to be with Google or Twitter or X, now under Musk, or maybe even Facebook, they would be able to find 1,000 people who are unhappy about their previous company. If you do it that way, then sure, you can basically describe any big company in the world, any company that has dismissed enough people as a place of darkness, and demonize that company. So, the New York Times only looked for people who had left Shen and Fei Tian. They said in their own report that some 80 people were interviewed. Even when 80 people were interviewed, 80 ex-performers, they could only pick out 8 or 7 who were really resentful. Even so, their quotes could only be used in bits and pieces. These people actually mentioned that Shen had instilled in them a high level of professionalism. They actually had some positive things to say about Shen and Falun Gong. The New York Times, in pretending to be neutral, of course, had to use some of their positive comments. But you have to see that when they planned for these interviews, their sampling was already extremely prejudiced. They're turning a blind eye to the 1,000 plus members of Shen who might have positive things to say. On Shen video streaming platform, shenyuncreations.com, as well as shenyun.org, you can find an abundance of content portraying the real lives of our performers and their artistry. They're completely turning a blind eye to these. Now, let's talk about some details in this New York Times article. They took more than a year to write the report, but they neglected doing some basic homework. They hadn't done any fact-checking. They hadn't done any due diligence. In the email they sent to Shenyun to check, they wrote that Shenyun performs for more than 5 months every year. Okay, everyone, remember that number, 5 months. Now, if you go to Shenyun's official website, the entire performance schedule is listed on a webpage. It's all open to the public, because the website's meant to sell tickets, right? They have no reason to hide the dates and cities from the public. So, these New York Times reporters, even if they had done a little homework, spent 5 minutes to log on to Shenyun.com to take a look at the schedule, they would figure out that Shenyun's world tour begins around Christmas time and it comes to a complete stop before May 12th every year. That's a total of 4.5 months, plus in between, some troops would return to headquarters to take short breaks. So the duration of Shenyun's tour is around 4 or 4.5 months, never more than 5 months. If the reporters can't even get these basic facts right, then I think they're completely lacking journalistic professionalism. They don't seem to care that the facts they're quoting are false and that the evidence they're using is wrong. The correspondents at Shenyun pointed out these basic mistakes because Monday morning was when the email was received, and they asked for a reply before Wednesday lunchtime. When the people at Shenyun responded and pointed out that mistake, they changed it in their published report. It was just such a basic error. They made another point in their article claiming that Shenyun performers, well, actually, they are not officially Shenyun performers, they are Feitian College students. They're claiming that Feitian College students have been denied treatment after getting injured. They went on to say that the more serious injuries did receive medical treatment, but those are the minority. Their original words were in rarity. In other words, they're saying all these dancers who get injured don't go to the hospital. Only in rare cases do they get treatment, and those have to be really serious injuries. Then the people at Shenyun replied and pointed out that's not true. For the minor injuries, the dance teachers are capable of treating them and will naturally take care of them, like put on a band-aid or something. As for the more serious injuries, the kind that the New York Times describes, as far as I know, the injured dancers have 100% gone to the hospital. Not only would they be taken to the hospital if the injury happened while training at headquarters, but when they're touring around the world, they would also be sent to the hospital, no matter which country they're in. I know that a performer was injured in France. He went to the hospital, saw a French doctor who told him that he needed surgery. Then the next day, they checked him again and decided he didn't need surgery anymore. He just needed a rest, so this performer left the tour and went home to Taiwan to recover. So what I'm saying is, in reality, a lot of attention is being paid to the health and well-being of the performers. Why is that? Because if the performer was not in a good state, they would bring down the quality of the entire performance and could basically ruin the show. It makes no sense for them to prevent the show from reaching its optimal stage effect. It makes no sense for them to force an injured dancer to keep performing. There could be cases of light injuries, such as minor pulls or sprains, where the performers themselves feel they can still go on. But that kind of persistence would definitely be a personal choice. Also, when you watch a NBA match, for example, a lot of basketball players are still playing on the court with minor injuries, and it's considered a display of professionalism. But if the injury is serious, the managers would absolutely not let the dancers go on stage. That's because they might bring down the quality of the entire performance. What we're talking about here, I have data to back it up. There are medical records as evidence. However, the New York Times has quite absurdly demanded Shenyun to provide all the medical records. As you know, private medical records are protected in the US by law, by the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. If the individual does not sign for consent, how could anyone send all the medical records to the New York Times? Like, who are you to ask for that, right? The hospital wouldn't even easily give the medical records of those individuals to the Shenyun company. Of all the individuals who went for treatment, you can't just freely give out that stuff. So, New York Times was demanding that if you do indeed allow all the cases of serious injuries to be treated, as you claim, then show us some evidence. But we just don't have any means of handing that over to the New York Times, all those personal medical records that are actually protected by US law. We are unable to present that evidence. Another thing to know is that simply here in the US, whoever asserts a claim should be the party to present evidence. It's the New York Times who's asserting that Shenyun does not permit medical treatment, so it's they who have the duty to present evidence to support their claim. Shenyun, as the accused party, is presumed innocent until proven guilty, and it does not have the duty to present evidence for the accusation. So after we pointed out this issue to them, that their claim is false and not representative of reality, they just deleted the words in rarity, just those two words. but they still kept the general claim of when Shenyun performers get injured or sick, they don't get sent in for treatment. As you probably all know, dancers getting injured is a very common phenomenon. Even in our modern age with advanced medical technology and various preventative measures, injury is still inevitable. Let's look at some stats. The U.S. National Library of Medicine in 2022 published a study on dance education, a very comprehensive study. This pertains specifically to dance education and made an investigation into injury rates. These are the complete statistics. The research here shows that the injury rate for professional dancers in every 1,000 hours of dance practice ranges from 0.8 to 4.7 times. In other words, for every 1,000 hours you train, you might expect to get injured twice. It's said these injuries are mostly chronic injuries due to overuse. Everyone knows Chinese classical dance is very demanding. All those flips and aerial techniques. If a person is on average 2+ meters high, if he does one of these somersaults or aerial flips, the whole person is completely flipping, and when he lands, when he hits the ground, his knees and soft tissues have to sustain a huge impact. If this continues for a long time, it causes these chronic injuries. These injuries are mostly, for example, in the lower limbs, ankles, knees, or buttocks, etc. This is data from the United States. In every 1,000 hours, there will be about 0.8 to 4.7 injuries. In fact, this data can be corroborated with Australian data. In an Australian study, the injury rate for every 1,000 hours is about 0.8 to 9.3 times, almost like the US, but slightly higher. Among Australian dance students or performers, almost all the dancers interviewed reported that they had suffered similar injuries themselves. In the report, 97% of dancers will experience one or multiple serious injuries during the course of their careers. 97%. That's very high. These statistics from the Australian Dance Organization showed that within a year, within the past 12 months, 73% of dancers reported at least one dance-related injury. And everyone knows dancing doesn't just involve getting injured. You might get injured while practicing dancing. There's a high chance of that. Another thing, as you know, an artist usually pursues perfection. In order to blossom in that moment of glory under the spotlight, not only will they practice painstakingly, 10 years of practice for 1 minute on stage, and a large proportion of artists, they might have some kind of mental health issues. A U.S. government website has a study called Mental Health in Dancers, or Mental Wellness Issues Among Dancers. And what do these statistics say? They say professional dancers, especially ballet dancers, often face a variety of psychological issues, including eating disorders in order to maintain their body shape, anxiety, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and perfectionist tendencies. These issues are more prominent in the dance field than in the general population. European studies found that the prevalence of eating disorders among professional dancers reached 12 to 26.5%. That is to say, almost 1/4 of professional dancers have eating disorders. In studies at the Norwegian National Ballet, the proportion of eating disorders reached as high as 50%. Apart from that, dancers would also have some mental health concerns like stress because of, for example, career uncertainty, because as a performer, it's very hard to find a job. Let me tell you a story. As you all know, there's a very famous Oscar-winning film director from Taiwan called Ang Lee. In 1978, Ang Lee went to study film at the University of Illinois. At that time, his father was very much against it. His father gave him a statistic. This is mentioned in Ang Lee's own memoir. His father told him, in America's Broadway industry, there are about 200 job openings every year. They will recruit around 200 actors. But there are 50,000 people competing for these 200 positions. You don't even need to think about being in a leading role. You'd be very lucky if you could even just get a small role in the background. So that means they are faced with extreme uncertainty and economic pressure in this kind of profession. And under these circumstances, you also have to maintain your body image. And also there are high expectations from teachers, from peers, and from audiences. So for many dancers, they have severe psychological distress. For example, depression or anxiety. My reason for giving you all this data, they're all studies from everyday society, it's about those ballet dancers in society. I also have friends who are in the ballet profession. You'll know it if you look it up. All ballet dancers, without exception, they have to stand on point to dance. The front part of a ballet shoe is very hard. It's a piece of wood. The toes have to bear the entire body's weight. And after jumping in the air, when you land, you have to land on the tips of your toes. So almost every ballet dancer has experienced that heart-rending pain of toenails falling off. Even all 10 toenails falling off. There's a saying, the fingers are linked to the heart, as in, finger injuries are extremely painful. Same with toes. That heartbreaking pain of toenails falling off. Not just once, also big toe eversion, various ankle and leg injuries, and so on. Every kind of ballet dancer has experienced this kind of thing, just like in other competitive sports, like a basketball player who ruptures his Achilles tendon or a soccer player who gets hit and fractures a bone. It's so common. If you follow what the New York Times says, these professions, including all competitive sports, we should just ban them all, right? No, that's not how it is. In human society, there are people who are willing to work hard and devote themselves for the sake of art or sport, just for that one moment, the pinnacle of their lives. By contrast, the things I mentioned just now, they're data from the wider society regarding those who partake in dance or other competitive sports. But in comparison, I must emphasize that Shenyun performers whose training and performance careers may last for more than 10 years, the proportion of injuries among these performers are considerably low. And you can also see their figures on stage or in normal life. They're handsome men and beautiful women, right? Not only their physical appearance and figure are pleasing to the eyes, their vibe is optimistic, their smiles are bright. This is absolutely nothing like what the New York Times says as a result from bullying or abuse. Of course, as a dancer, you might be stressed. For example, you need to stay in shape. There's no way around it. That's a requirement of your career. Just like the Royal Ballet School in London, they clearly state if you want to dance ballet, you have to find a balance between your own body shape and healthy eating habits. So you may see a lot of, for example, those professional models on the catwalk. They're all skin and bones. What do they eat every day? Maybe just an apple or a handful of nuts, drink lots of water, absolutely no carbs. All those delicious things that are high in sugar, salt, or oils, can't eat any of them. Can't eat sugar, chocolate, honey, rice, noodles. All carbohydrates are off limits. They're off limits because they need to stay in shape. But there are people who are willing to do that. And you can't do anything about it, right? If you really want to be a dancer, then you need to stay in shape. If you don't want to do it, you're free to go. This is one's career choice. The New York Times said that the salaries of Shenyun performers are very meager. In fact, this is also a common misconception. In fact, the people interviewed by the New York Times were not Shenyun performers, they were mainly Feitian students who had an educational training in Shenyun. These students participated in this training called practicum as a part of their studies in order to gain performance experience and receive school credit. So during the tour period as well as on-campus period, any monetary compensation they received is not a salary. That's important. It's not a salary. It's just a stipend to help cover educational program expenses. In addition, when they're students at Feitian, tuition is completely free, food and lodging are all included, clothing throughout the year, dance shoes, group uniforms, suitcases, and bags are all given by the school. In the winter, wool coats are given. In the summer, for example, they give out t-shirts or say a jacket in the autumn. Clothing for all 4 seasons, dance shoes, the suits that they wear, and the dress shirts, and so on, they're all given out. Even the suitcases, it's all given to them for free. In other private schools, the tuition for 1 year of study is between $30,000 and $50,000. At Juilliard, it's at least $50,000. That's a tuition for 1 year and doesn't even include room and board. But Feitian students receive an educational stipend, plus food and free dormitory housing with water, electricity, internet, and various other benefits like getting all kinds of free clothing and so on. It doesn't cost the student a single penny. One person's average expenses for 1 month, including room and board, water, electricity, and various other benefits, also including the educational stipends, added together would be about $2,000 to $3,000. These are the benefits that a Feitian student receives. And if you add on the tuition, anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000 a year, then actually every year they should have paid $60,000 to $80,000, but they didn't have to pay a single penny. This is pretty much equivalent to Juilliard's tuition fee of $50,000 a year plus $20,000 living expenses. Moreover, Feitian Academy of the Arts and Feitian College seeks to train these students to become world-class artists, performing in the world's top theaters. For many people with artistic dreams, it's a rare opportunity. You go to Broadway, you want to be in a musical or get any small role or something like that. People may not even want you. So, being able to perform in the top theaters around the world, this is an honor in itself. I remember in 1983, the Hong Kong TVB Jade channel shot a drama called Legend of the Condor Heroes. And what was Stephen Chow doing at the time? Stephen Chow played a soldier in that show, who got shot with an arrow by Chairman Chiu or somebody, the main character. And he fell to the ground and died. Play dead, that was his job. At the beginning, you could only be an extra, and at most, you can only get a small role. But these Feitian students, when they're student trainees at Shenyun, they shine on the world's top stages. For anyone involved in the arts, if they were to perform at the Kennedy Center Opera House, or Lincoln Center's David Koch Theater, or those famous opera houses in Europe, if you ask him to spend his own money to fly there and book a hotel, buy everything he needs for the performance, he would be completely willing, because for him it's a recognition of his artistic achievement. But Feitian students, when touring with Shen Yun, they don't need to spend a penny. As the Chinese saying goes, they are really reading thousands of books and traveling thousands of miles. And when they're out on tour, the food is really good. Generally speaking, there are 20 to 30 dishes for them to choose from. And outside of performance time, they can go sightseeing, shopping, they can visit museums. The breadth of their knowledge and richness of their experience are undoubtedly among the top 1% of their peers. And if their artistic achievements reach the standard, in the future they might actually be recruited into Shenyun Performing Arts and become an official employee of Shenyun. Of course, any school can't guarantee the student future job opportunities. Feitian College and Feitian Academy of the Arts are no exceptions. If he can't make it into Shenyun or he can't remain on campus, then the school will try to introduce jobs to him. Or if he wants to study another major, accounting, finance, whatever, then the school will also give some suggestions or guidance. Even an ordinary university will provide career counseling for when the students graduate, just to give you advice on finding a job or on writing your resume. This is considered a common practice at most universities. Everyone does this. In reality, Feitian College and Academy are like the usual private schools or private art schools. If you chose the field of art for a career, then you must face the realities of the field. The New York Times also attacked Shenyun performers and Feitian College students on the basis of their faith. As you might know already, the headquarters of Shenyun is based on the property of Dragon Springs. Dragon Springs is a registered religious organization. Within Dragon Springs, Feitian College and Feitian Academy of the Arts are religious schools or religiously affiliated institutions. They are religiously affiliated art schools. So, of course, for a religious school, if you don't believe in that faith, then you just wouldn't come. It's a very simple point. However, one thing is certain, and that is the question of whether or not a person wants to cultivate spiritually. Whether or not that person wants to cultivate the Buddhahood, that is completely up to the person, him or herself. No one can force a person, can't make someone practice Buddhism, for example, and it's even more impossible to just turn someone into a Buddha. There's no way around it if that person doesn't really want to cultivate. So if a person doesn't believe our master or the principles that he teaches, then you don't have to force yourself. Just withdraw from this religious school and go attend another school in society. That's it, right? This school never said to any student, "Oh, you're leaving? Then pay us back that scholarship we gave you for all of these years. The money that went into your training, give it all back." There was never a case of this happening. Even the New York Times admits in its reporting that no student had to pay back their scholarships. In fact, when a student leaves, the school may find it a pity, but still hopes that the student can be a good person after leaving, can make good academic achievements, and develop a career for himself or herself. There's a saying in Chinese, a gentleman will never utter a bad word upon ending a friendship. When true gentlemen depart from each other, they don't throw hurtful words around. It's just a proper goodbye, and from then on, each go their own separate ways. Another accusation of studying at Feitian College or Feitian Academy of the Arts that the New York Times makes is the control over access to information, which is in reality an attack on the use of smartphones. The U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, the leading spokesperson on health in the U.S. federal government, believes that using smartphones and social media platforms pose risks to a person's mental health. Thus, in the Los Angeles Unified School District, starting from January 1st, 2025, students will not be allowed to use smartphones for the whole school day. This is the second largest public school district in the United States with a student population of over 400,000. Now, the governor of California is urging the state to implement a similar restriction throughout California, and New York State is following suit. Smartphones can indeed be harmful to a person's focus and mental health. Parents are very upset about students getting addicted to smartphones, but there's not much they can do. It's also notable to mention how the U.S. government has banned TikTok. Not only is TikTok a spyware, the harmful effects it has on a person's attention span and mental capacities is also really scary. So actually, when I was in school, there was no internet at all. Even television was not widely available, but we read paper books, printed books. Even using paper books, you can still become a learned person. So students can, when they have time, read more good books in the library, because reading books can improve students' knowledge and cultivate their moral character, much more than browsing fragmented information at random on the internet. And this is exactly what many parents want us to do. As for Fei Tian having strict requirements for students for their artistic and academic development, this is in any school something quite normal. There's a Chinese saying, diligence finds you the path through the mountain of books, hard work is your arc over the vast sea of learning. In the process of learning new knowledge or attaining a new skill, everyone will need to endure some setbacks. But for some people, once they hear any criticism, they interpret it as bullying and say, you're abusing me. I think that this is a problem on the student's part and an issue with their understanding. Suffering setbacks in life, getting criticized or reprimanded because of violating a company rule, these are things that a person must go through as he or she grows up. If a person grows up only hearing compliments but no criticism, he'll end up being too pampered and definitely will not be able to accomplish much. In addition, for people who actually bully and abuse others, it is meant to satisfy the perverted psychology of the perpetrator. But criticizing you is meant so that you can correct your mistakes and become better. So I think if we apply common sense to the things the New York Times says, you will find that what they say completely does not mesh with common sense, including their accusation that for students leaving campus, registration is required and they cannot leave on a whim. Let me tell you, the New York Times completely doesn't understand education in America. It's weird. How can you, the New York Times, not even understand education in New York? How can you not understand education in a normal society? A boarding school is responsible for the safety of the students, especially when the school has a lot of students living on campus under the age of 18. They're called minors. The school has a huge responsibility. And the teachers are actually serving as guardians for these students, especially since Fallen Gong is being persecuted by the CCP, and its agents are keeping a predatory surveillance going just around Shenyun's headquarters. There are many agents of the Chinese Communist Party. So as for a minor, what would we do if something bad happens when you go off campus, right? How would we explain it to your parents? So that means it's not that the school doesn't let these people go out, but when you do go out, it needs to arrange for you to stay with the older students as much as possible, so you can leave safely and come back safely. This is done to keep you safe. If you really feel this place is too strict, like I feel I don't have the freedom to go where I want, in fact, in any boarding school, students are not allowed to leave casually. For minors, you cannot just leave on a whim. If, for example, you think, I'm too restricted here, I want to be casual, I just want to have fun, do whatever I want to go to the bar, I want to take drugs, I want to book a hotel room with someone else. If you really think this way, then this school is not suitable for you, because according to the school rules, these things are not allowed. Of course, there are some other allegations by the New York Times, a lot of strange ones. In fact, I don't even want to talk about them one by one. For example, they mention dating and getting married to get visas, things of that sort. This is complete nonsense. That is to say, it seems, of course, the New York Times in the beginning called it arranged marriage later, and after we explained it, they don't dare to put it that way anymore. Because everyone that falls in love and gets married is of their own free will. No one can force that someone must get married to someone else, or this person to that person. You choose for yourselves. I've hosted around 20 weddings, so basically around 40 Shenyun performers. I officiated at their wedding and signed the documents. Some people got married to people from the school because they were classmates before or already were familiar with each other. These couples knew each other well and then got married. They're very happy. For some people, they find someone, we call it off mountain, outside Feitian or Shenyun. They find a partner. That is also very normal. I've also hosted these weddings. One thing that is for sure is they all married of their own free will. Some married couples were love at first sight, some were not. That is actually not a big deal. I think there's no difference from how it is anywhere in society. Similar to how I fell in love and got married. There's no difference. You just choose someone. Of course, there are many similar rumors like this. I don't think I want to clarify everything one by one. All in all, these rumors, if you clarify one, they will just create a bunch more. So I think for the New York Times, what is the problem right now? The first problem is that the New York Times is using quotes from a select few who hold prejudice or hatred against Fei Tian or Shen Yun, using their claims to attack Fei Tian and Shen Yun. They don't care if it's inaccurate or that it is taken out of context, and they don't talk to anyone who has a positive understanding of Fei Tian on what they think about this matter. That is to say, when they report there's a problem with their argument, and that is intentional. Furthermore, they obviously know something else, which is the CCP has been attacking Shen Yun as a means to attack Falun Gong, and it is one of their most important tactics. That is shown in the CCP's documents. All of it is said very clearly. Attack Shen Yun. So in this case, for the New York Times, everything they did fell under the control of the Chinese Communist Party. Throughout this episode, I also mentioned at the beginning, all of the different tactics used to attack Shen Yun were very similar to the methods employed by the CCP in July 1999, during the start of the persecution of Falun Gong. The methods they used were exactly the same. The whole thing is a routine, a pattern. In America, it's called a playbook. They're just following the operation manual of the CCP, demonizing Falun Gong, demonizing Shen Yun. This is the New York Times' biggest problem right now. And they didn't think of saying that Falun Gong is a persecuted group considered a minority in America. When they demonize Falun Gong and Shen Yun like this, they are in fact giving us, the minority, people who have been persecuted, additional risks. You're basically inciting hatred against us. So I think this is the New York Times' second problem. The third problem is that the New York Times is not truly acting from its own free will. It's very possible behind the scenes there is a carefully planned and coordinated operation. The Falun Dafa Information Center recently issued a report that 3 independent sources in China verified that the Ministry of Public Security called a meeting of all the provincial public security departments. Although nothing official was released, people of course took notes or made recordings of the proceedings. During the meetings, they mentioned that one of their strategies, which was put into place last year, was to utilize the internet personalities they've sponsored to spread misinformation about Falun Gong, Shen Yun, and Fei Tian, and to especially target Shen Yun. Recently, the Department of Justice revealed that 2 Chinese spies attempted to bribe the IRS to revoke Shen Yun's non-profit status. The FBI knew about this plan. An investigator acting as an IRS agent answered the call from those 2. They brazenly told the investigator that they wanted to give him money in return for helping them revoke Shen Yun's non-profit status. Of course, with this call, the FBI had first-hand evidence, so both of these spies pled guilty. What else could they do in the face of such conclusive evidence? So this whole situation, including the attacks on Falun Gong by the so-called internet personalities and New York Times hit piece on Falun Gong, another magazine in New York recently published an attack on Falun Gong, as well as some other publication in France and attacks on Shen Yun. For all of these to happen at the same time, without being interrelated, is unimaginable, highly improbable. At least for me, it's clear that this is being coordinated behind the scenes by one entity. Perhaps the people publishing these pieces aren't aware that they're part of the CCP's overarching strategy, or maybe they fell for what the CCP wanted them to do. But I think that's what's going on behind the scenes of this New York Times report. So, in regards to this report, I think there's a lot more issues with it that we can discuss. Over the past year or so, they contacted many former Shen Yun artists, even going through other connections to find these former artists. One of the people who attacked us, the New York Times already published her name. I'll call her Cici, because her first name in Pinyin would be Si, even though it's spelled in the Taiwanese way. So I'll call her Cici. She provided some of the content in the New York Times report. Actually, in her own program, she mentioned she visited Beijing and went to Beijing Dance Academy, and then she was brainwashed. To what extent? She didn't even believe that the CCP's persecution of Falun Gong existed. That's how strongly she was brainwashed. When she came back, she began attacking us. She even had a performance in Taiwan that was a collaboration with a mainland Chinese entity. So, of course, the funding for that was coming from them. So if you look closely, a lot of the most fervent attacks on us, they're coming from people who have visited Beijing. I won't go into detail for every person, but since Cici mentioned herself that she'd visited Beijing, that's public information. I won't talk about other people. So I think there's a lot of these issues going on behind the scenes, and when you look at them together, it's clear that the current situation is no coincidence. As we mentioned earlier, the New York Times published 3 articles today. One was an attack on Shen. The second was about Fallen Gong, and the third article was a quick summary of the first article. In the article about Falun Gong, well, the persecution of Falun Gong is well known at this point, with congressional resolutions, the archives of human rights groups, the human rights reports put together by the Department of State, all referencing the persecution of Falun Gong. So, the New York Times can't deny it. They have to admit that Falun Gong is indeed undergoing persecution. What they tried to do then is to portray Falun Gong as something very strange with very eccentric beliefs, but that's not a justification for attacking Falun Gong or Shen Yun. Every religion is bound to include things that can't be understood or believed by an outsider. For instance, the Christian faith says that God created the universe in 6 days and rested on the 7th. The average person would say that's unscientific, but Christians are willing to believe it. Can you deprive someone of their freedom of belief just because of that? You go up to every Christian and say, "You think God created the universe in 6 days? You must be some kind of irrational fanatics," and arrest them for this? Christians believe that Jesus was resurrected 3 days after his crucifixion. Would the average person believe that a dead person could come back to life after 3 days? So, if you use that as an excuse to go after Christianity, wouldn't it be too much? What's the point of freedom of belief then? Every religion believes in their own God. Buddhists believe in Shakyamuni's declaration, "Throughout heaven and earth, I alone am honored." In Christianity, Jesus says, "No one comes to the Father except through me," which means if you don't believe in Jesus, you won't go to heaven. And Christians also say unbelievers will go to hell when they die. According to the New York Times, it's all bullying and emotional abuse, manipulation. But that's not the case at all. For any religion, you don't have to share their faith, but if they're peaceful, not harmful, they don't cheat people or do drugs, commit crimes, or do anything illegal. Whatever they believe, they have the freedom to do so, and it's none of your business. So if you make these kinds of attacks on a religious group, that's a form of discrimination, because you're taking these teachings out of context and holding them up for ridicule. Then that really is discrimination towards an ethnic minority or a religious group. Perhaps that's even against the law. Intentionally or not, you're demonizing a religious group, which also happens to be an ethnic minority. I think that's a big problem. So if you happen to see this article by the New York Times or whatever article it may be, I want everyone to know that you have to separate the opinions from the facts. In the New York Times article, even if you take the evidence they presented based on misinformation, they still can't logically support the conclusions they drew. So, I have to say, this article might be systematically well written, but the quality overall is very lacking. And there wasn't any fact-checking done or due diligence taken. They did not do their research at all. Those are my thoughts about the New York Times report published today, and what I know about the situation, and how it might be the CCP pulling the strings here. So the New York Times' actions have really been playing to the CCP's plan to eradicate Falun Gong in America, although I'm 100% certain that they will never succeed. So that's all I had to say about that today. Leave a comment if you'd like to ask a question, and maybe we can discuss about it more on the weekend if you're interested. Disclaimer: all the points we just discussed are my personal views and do not necessarily represent others. If you enjoyed the content, please share with your friends and click some buttons. See you next time.